Good afternoon and welcome to this month's show. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders in rolling out a zero trust architecture. With me on today's show are Alper Kerman, cybersecurity engineer and project manager at the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which is part of NIST. Shane Barney, chief information security officer, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. Trefenia Flynn Salzman, Security Architect, Small Business Administration. Mark Sinkovich, Federal Director, Illumio. Chris Roberts, Federal Technology Director, Quest Software Public Sector. And Tony D'Angelo, VP North America Public Sector at Lookout. A big subject here was zero trust architecture. The White House published a executive order, I think it was back in May. And if I recall, there were 11 citations in there regarding the zero trust architecture. Of course, NIST has published their 800-207 back in August. Let's start with you, Alper. What's going on over at NIST? A lot of different activity going on in regards to defining an architecture, a framework, et cetera, and a rollout of zero trust architecture.
Yes. We are obviously a research facility, and so we've been researching zero trust actually since early 2019. In fact, our first project was driven by a federal initiative for the adoption of zero trust principles and approaches for securing federal information systems. Outcome of that year-long project was the document you just mentioned, the special publication 800-207, the ZTA guidance document that most everyone is familiar by now.
Which I might add is a lot of heavy lifting associated to that. So well done.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And so that it was, we partnered with Federal CIO Council on that effort. We led the technical work with volunteers from various government agencies and put together that document, and it was well received. We received a lot of positive, feedback, and of course, I think that was our really initial effort that actually helped spread the zero trust knowledge, because we, it's a document that describes what zero trust is, what zero trust architectures are in a conceptual level, if you will, technology agnostic way. But I think that not a spread of knowledge gained momentum after the release of the EO 14028, and then of course after especially after OMB's federal zero trust strategy, I would say. So that's really all I can say about the document in terms of that effort. But then after that, we decided to get our hands dirty, so to speak, and we decided to build a zero trust test lab. And so that was a great experience for us. It was mostly, though, educational and fact finding. We conducted we built a network infrastructure, put together, got our hands on some zero trust technologies, and conducted tests and performed gap analysis. So it was a great exercise for us. Now we are the next thing that we're doing is this project that we just launched, and basically it's a follow-on ZTA demonstration project for the guidance that we put out for the NIST special publication 800-207. So we will be collaborating about 20 or so vendors to build example ZTAs using blend of technologies that work together. And of course, again, this will be completely based on the guidance that we provide, more specifically the deployment models that we describe in that document.
Right. So that's great groundwork and sort of a lay down. You've got to be able to define this capability. I know there's a lot of good work on. You cited the zero trust strategy and certainly the zero trust maturity model that the community is working on. Well, great segue over to USCIS. Shane, you're in the middle of implementing this capability now, been on that journey for some time.
Yes,
you all were very aggressive going out into the cloud, et cetera. Tell us how the journey is going as far as laying this architecture down.
Yeah, we started in Zero Trust quite a while ago, actually, before 2019, and long before the EO, primarily because, as you pointed out, our heavy cloud presence forced us to realize that we had to do identity, we had to do asset management, we had to do all of it differently. Cloud drives that point home quite nicely and usually in epic ways. And so some hard lessons we learned doing that. We quickly realized that we needed a different approach to how we were going to do things. And so in our end of 2019, early 2020 strategic plan for cybersecurity, we built in the Zero Trust model. We included it in there. We even called it Zero Trust, which I'm certainly not the fan of. If I can get my friends at NIST to change the Zero Trust name, I will gladly pay for that. But that all being said, yeah, we started very early because we needed to deal with our cloud assets in a better way. We needed to be able to better, this isn't about no trust, what Zero Trust implies. It's actually about very granular trust at the very, at asset level. So, really talking about asset trust and how those things and how your assets interact with one another, regardless of what that asset is. It could be data, it could be, a person, it could be a laptop, it could be a server, it could be a virtualized environment. All these different assets interact and how that trust levels work, and how trust works at those varying levels became very critical for us. So we started early on in. We also realized very quickly that identity was the key turning point here. If we didn't get that right out the gate, anything we did after that built upon it was just meaningless. And we extended our understanding of what identity was not just a user logging in with single sign-on. It was far more than that. It is of course the role-based access. You needed that, but it's even more so than that because you had to extend. Most of the time, people just apply role-based access to the users. You have to start applying to all your assets. You've got to understand the geography of your assets. You have to understand how they interact, when it's okay not to interact, and how those interactions are impacting your overall kind of trust enterprise. And so we did things like deploying a secrets management solution. We knew we had to manage our secrets well, and we had to do it in an automated fashion. We deployed. We're in the process actually of automating a good portion of our certificate management as well. Because that, again, it's part of your identity infrastructure. You need to be able to have that locked down and solid, or you're simply just not going to get very far. And then I think the final piece, which we really started focusing heavily on, probably in 2018, but more recently in the last couple of years, is the security automation side of it. None of this is going to be done by humans on a very granular level. This is all going to be done by automation. And so getting your automated infrastructure in place, getting your tool sets in place to help you control that, watch that, and oversee it, and most importantly, provide the feedback loop that ensures that your perception of the security of your enterprise meets the reality of the security of your enterprise. And that delta is probably the most important thing that you do as you go through this journey. And the last thing I think we spent a lot of time on, at least I have, is helping my leadership at all levels understand that the Zero Trust is not a project. It's not something we're going to do and be done. Zero Trust is going to be with us forever. It's going to become more program level in the sense that it'll always be with us. We're always going to be talking about it. If it's done correctly, we will still be dealing with Zero Trust principles well into the future because it's an architect. It's the way you build your entire organization. So clearly, it's not going away. So it's not a one and done. It's not here, deploy this tool and you're good to go. This is going to be an ongoing effort that we'll all be engaged on. So helping my leadership understand that, I think is really critical to success as well.
Yeah, I think the people always seem to leave off the A in the Zero Trust piece of that, and that architecture really important. It's a journey. It's a culture, if you will.
It is a culture.
And speaking of culture, Trefenia, you all sort of got launched into an exploding capability over there when all this relief money was coming out, et cetera. Had to really change your environment very quickly and implement a lot of this stuff in a very short amount of time. How's that going for you?
Yeah, well, with COVID-19, it definitely, we had 5,000 employees, and then by the end of I guess in the middle of COVID-19, we had 20,000 employees. So we really had to scale very quickly and be able to support all of those small businesses and all of the services that we had to offer, the American people. So it's been, I'd say it's been really good because our leadership was already forward thinking when it came to cloud, kind of like Shane touched on. We're kind of already had a good cloud foundation so that we could scale when something like this happened, and we were in a good position to do that. I think COVID-19 and Zero Trust just kind of propelled us forward, both with leadership and with our technologies. It definitely gave us more like a catalyst, more of some oomph to get us moving forward towards that Zero Trust architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's been going really well.
Glad to hear that. Mark, over at Illumio, you all are one of many pieces of this sort of framework, if you will, that needs to snap in and help address this architecture. Tell us what you're seeing there. Give us a state of the state.
So I have the opportunity to be able to talk to a lot of federal customers and prospects, and I'm very thankful for that. And what I'm seeing across the board is that there's a tremendous emphasis on ICAM, or identity, as Shane had talked about. But, and then there's also an emphasis, I'm talking about the different 5 pillars of Zero Trust, right? Typically there's the identity piece, the network piece, the device piece, and then those are where the emphasis is on the federal government. The challenge is none of those focus areas are going to stop the lateral movement of a cyber attack. And when we look at SolarWinds and we look at the damage that was caused by that breach and then the lateral spread, it was caused because there wasn't any trust, any policy between the workloads in the application. So if I switch over to another pillar of Zero Trust, which is the workload and application pillar, you have to have a really good microsegmentation policy under that pillar to stop the lateral movement. Because as we know in Zero Trust, you have to assume a breach. So the enemy's already inside the wire. So knowing that, if you don't have a way to have policy with your apps and workloads, then those packets that shouldn't be there in the network are unrestricted, and they're going to cause major damage. And one of the things that we're seeing at Illumio is obviously many organizations. It certainly started in the civilian side of things, and it's moving to the DoD, obviously moving to the cloud. But in a lot of ways, the cloud increases the attack vector, right? So when you have an on-prem data center, there's less people that can access that data center just because of the nature of it being inside a federal building. But now you put it to the cloud and you have a higher attack vector. And certainly a big challenge is insider threat, right? And if you have an insider threat who has access to cloud resources, can do a significant amount of damage. But if you have microsegmentation to the apps and workloads, that will stop the damage from spreading. But let me just back up 1 second. Before you start to think about microsegmentation and figuring out that, you need visibility. And I think that's where a lot of folks can start. Right now, I can say definitively that the federal government in general does not know they can't see their apps and workloads. They can't see the connectivity. And the idea is, how can you do something about an enemy that you can't see coming? So you've got to be able to have that visibility first, and then be able to prioritize and execute, sort of a military principle, right? Of where's the biggest threat from the ports that are potentially open. And then you start to lock those ports down through a microsegmentation policy. We call it a containment switch. And then from there, you can then decide and a rollout strategy to roll out microsegmentation. And that will literally shore up your network from having an attack moving laterally.
Yeah, no doubt that, boy, we learned this all the way back at the OPM breach, right? That these collateral and tertiary systems and not having some of those principles in place really caused a lot of havoc in the environment, a lot of damage in the environment. Chris, how about over at Quest Software? Give us a sort of paint a picture of the top line. What are you seeing over there? How's it working in regards to these agencies trying to implement this zero trust architecture?
Morning, thanks, Luke. So the key word there is working. And I like the idea that we all pretty much agree that there is no one solution for achieving a zero trust architecture. There is no destination. It's just a train that we just can't get off of, quite frankly, and it will keep on going. So the important thing to understand within these organizations, and when we talk to our customers, and I have the benefit of working across both our public sector organizations as well as some of our commercial counterparts, and I see what they're doing, and then also our DoD and civilian customers. And depending on who you talk to, there's a varying degree of either hope or despair. And I just want to be frank about that. The key thing I would like to come back to is that the executive order, for instance, which was great because it pointed out some very key things. You need to basically detect something, you have to remediate something, and you have to respond. Those three things encompass so much. And I like that Shane talked about the fact that you're going to have to get used to automation. You're going to have to do things, quite frankly, that humans can't do. That is, when Mark said about identifying packets of microsegmentation, you have to be able to adapt as quickly as the network adapts. Advanced persistent threats don't just sit dormantly sometimes. They are very active. Those lateral movements that happen, like Luke talked about in OPM, are indicative of one of our Achilles heels, and it's a large technical debt we have of aging infrastructure. And while we like the idea of the new, modern, really cool architecture, there are some very old things sitting in our networks. And I won't name agencies because
Sure.
I don't like talking about my customers in that way, but the more technical debt we have, the harder it is to identify for things like the endpoints, the data that sits on those endpoints, the applications that depend on those endpoints. So for instance, our strategy when we walk in is to, one, do a lot of identification of what's actually in a network, what's in an architecture, for instance. And then we ask our customers basically maybe 5 or 6 basic questions about, one, how are you managing that, monitoring that? How are you securing it, protecting it? How do you consolidate it, and how do you migrate it if you have to? And depending on their answers to those questions, we'll look into our portfolio and try to determine exactly what's the right solution stack for that particular client. But we found that once you identify and admit that you have to have some sort of architecture, whether you agree with these things or not. And this is a great point because we say back in 2019, zero trust at NIST started. Well, let's be honest. We've been talking about zero trust, least privilege, for instance, access controls forever. I've been doing this since, Banyan Vines. I'm just going to embarrass myself. Okay. And we now understand that all those objects, all that content that flies across our wires needs a lot of attention. And so we're helping our customers identify those endpoints, identify those data, but more importantly, as Mark pointed out, what are those applications doing? Where are they, quite frankly? So we look at that architecture and yes, we'll apply a lot of solutions, but I think our customers now realize that, oh my goodness, there isn't just one silver bullet we can touch. For instance, there isn't just one magic solution. And now we've learned also as a vendor to work with both customer and competitor and other agencies within the federal government to think about exactly what's the right approach to zero trust and how is the right model applicable for a specific agency and its specific mission.
Yeah, I think the executive order is certainly sort of putting a spotlight on that sort of, and it's not even the agencies admitting it, it's they're required to now, and they're going in there and discovering all these various things. And thank goodness the Technology Modernization Fund is available for them to address some of that technical debt. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about zero trust architecture. And we were just going over the top line, if you will, on where we are, sort of a state of the state. Tony, we think about Lookout, and we know this is a company that sort of dominates the mobile end space there, but Lookout's a lot bigger than that, and thankfully, right, because we have an entire architecture that we have to roll out here. Give us a top line as to what's happening at Lookout and what's going on with zero trust architecture.
Sure, thanks, Luke. Yeah, as you stated, Lookout has its roots based in mobile threat defense. Been doing that about 14 years, and we've expanded our portfolio into the SASE space, which is certainly relevant as we talk about zero trust architecture. The secure access service edge portfolio of solutions, it really fits well within zero trust architecture. around kind of three main pieces. One is securing legacy enterprise applications with solutions like ZTNA, which is typically used for VPN replacement. CASB, which is quite familiar probably to most people, which is securing commercial cloud applications, and also secure web gateway. And really the premise of zero trust is the fact that the perimeter is gone. The data resides outside the network, and frankly, we reside outside the network, which further exacerbated by the pandemic. I think there was we heard some commentary early, which I certainly agree with, that zero trust has been in the making for some time, and people have effectively been moving towards a lot of those types of solutions and securing their networks. But the pandemic forced all of us at home and many times on mobile devices. So I think one of the key elements here is starting with the endpoint and taking it all the way through the cloud. And today, 70% of all internet data is accessed by a mobile device, yet only roughly 1/3 of all devices have some sort of mobile security on them. So I think as with work from home possibly being a permanent fixture for many, certainly many in the private sector, but many in the public sector as well. I think not only the endpoint, but the mobile endpoint needs to be well cared for and thought of as part of any zero trust architecture. The other notion around this SASE technology, many folks, both private and public sector, look to Gartner for a lot of the intelligence around these types of things. Gartner, I think a point of note here that their magic quadrant for the SASE technology, first of all, they're likely to rename it SSE. So if you see the terminology SSE, that's they're going to drop the A, it'll be Secure Service Edge. But they're building one just for SSE and not separately for the other types of cloud solutions I mentioned previously. So the thought behind that is, as a user, private or public sector, you might be on a legacy commercial application, shift to something like an Office 365 fully commercial cloud application, and then browse the web. And you want to be able to, as a user and as an administrator, you want a good experience for your employees and be able to do that seamlessly across through a single proxy. So Gartner's really picked up on that, and they're only looking to evaluate companies that have really all three of those technologies. So best in breed works in certain areas of technology, and I know everybody here has probably done that. I think as we begin to look at some of these cloud security solutions, the level of complexity, policy management, and the user experience potentially degrades when you start to look at multiple solutions in those types of categories. So real interesting what we're going to see out of Gartner. And I think that they're certainly going to provide some additional color around what all of you, public and private sector, are doing around zero trust.
And no doubt that the evolution of as they start to suss this out in the zero trust maturity model and the cloud security technical reference architecture, that they're closing out those public comments, and we'll soon publish that. I think will help in sort of putting a fine point on this. Shane, let's roll back over to you. You all, again, as cited, have been very aggressive in rolling out these various capabilities, and undoubtedly had to start, building out the zero trust architecture. Lots of different pieces of this. It was cited 5 different elements. Give us if you want to highlight one piece of the program that you'd like to highlight, and just tell us about what's going on with that, maybe even sort of what you've discovered there, what's working, what maybe is not working.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's funny, we started doing zero trust before we realized we were doing zero trust, primarily driven by need, and just realization that the way the cloud operates, I don't see cloud as more secure or less secure than prem. It's just different, and understanding the differences was critical for us. Fortunately for me, well, sort of fortunately, we had a number of incidents and close calls that brought home the message that we needed to change the way we do stuff. Automation, I think, was the first thing that really hit home, especially with cloud technologies. The realization that the scale, scope, and speed at which cloud operates was well beyond our resources. It just wasn't something we were capable of doing. The idea of watching screens for alerts had to go. So we had started investing, bit by bit, kind of taking the agile approach, where you start small, you sort of fail forward, you expect failure, you learn from failure, and you keep going. And maybe you only do a little tiny thing here and a little tiny thing there, but all those things add up over time. Automation was one of the key pieces that we started into, primarily because of cloud, but it became obvious to us very quickly that it was going to be critical to identity as well. USCIS established the Center of Excellence for it for DHS and has helped really drive the security automation piece home. I think my SOC now, because we track the automations and we use the labor hours of those automations that wouldn't have normally cost us had we not had the automation in place. I think we're doing about $20 million a year in savings right now in automation. And it's just continually to grow. So I think for me and for USCIS in general, automation was critical, and not just in the SOC, it had to be expanded. And so right now we're in the process of automating larger segments of the security program itself. The FISMA controls and alignments there, even documentation. We've finally started doing that part of it. I'm done having people write Word documents and submitting them over and over and over again. So automating those portions and parts of the security program are also just as critical, because you need to free up those resources to focus on the things you don't know about, and focus on those unknown threats as opposed to the knowns.
Automating very key, and also, obviously being able to operate at machine speed, right? I mean, that's the reality of the environment that we're in. Chris, how about over at Quest? Give us you have an opportunity to stripe across all these various agencies. Give us an example of one program you'd like to highlight that you would want to recognize.
Sure, I'm going to feed off my last comments around our aging infrastructure and technical debt. That is, when we walk into a customer's data center, they're looking for a solution typically for the most prevalent application or system. And my questions usually formulate around, well, what's supporting that particular application or system? And we found that one very large agency, and they were security oriented, from a national perspective, is that they processed so many transactions that they were dependent on a couple of specific types of systems that were based on versions of Unix that, quite frankly, just really weren't heavily supported when it comes to modern security architectures. And they asked us, well, can you protect and can you insulate or isolate identities on these particular platforms? And where most agencies have migrated to Active Directory and ICAM and more modern identity systems, they still had these legacy Unix systems, and they weren't going away, because if they went away, I think a lot of us would actually be impacted based on what they did. So we actually came up with a solution where we actually had something that will do what we call privilege access management and privilege session management for those Unix machines. And we were able to, with a lot of political consternation and discussion, get the Unix administrators to let someone else determine when they would be able to access those systems. If you've ever worked with Unix administrators, and I used to be one, and so some of you may have, they don't like giving up God mode or keys to the kingdom. So we were able to come up with a just-in-time admin super user account process. So when they needed to do something or kill a daemon, for instance, on a system, or work on a process, or write a script, or change something at ring 0, for instance, we were able to provide that kind of access. It made a material difference because the amount of money it would have taken to re-architect, re-platform those Unix systems would have really been prohibitive for the agency at that particular time. And the dynamic nature of what they did, they would literally be changing an engine in flight to try to get those systems changed now. Now, fast forward, they're moving to AWS. They're moving to a containerized architecture. They've understood that technical debt was a disaster. No, I shouldn't say disaster. That's a bad word for them. But it was something that needed to change. And now that they're moving to a more modern architecture, it's a lot easier to start employing more industry accepted solutions. So as Tony was talking about what they do with Lookout, for instance, that is an entirely modern architecture. I look at what we're doing, for instance, across cloud and with ICAM and with sessions management, it's a lot easier now that they're moving to these architectures. And the fact that they're on a major cloud provider, for instance, it makes the integration of those things easier. And I think that's the thing that we overlook. When Shane talked about automating, if you're trying to automate something on PowerShell, or any old code base, for instance, it's very difficult. But once you have access to modern APIs or managed APIs, and you can get to data sets and get to those identities quickly, you can architect those systems and create a process that everyone can actually live with, and that even old Stone Age Unix administrators won't object to. So it was a happy ending. It's not a public case study, for instance, but we do talk about it when we can in situations like this. So back to you, Luke.
Yeah, modernizing our way into a more secure environment, and being able to give better capabilities to our citizens. Trefina, how about at SBA? You talked about quadrupling your workforce, had to move them out to COVID, scale up those environments. Now you're doubling down on all this architecture. How's it going? Give us a specific example, one piece of that you all are working on that you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, I want to highlight the asset pillar of Zero Trust. So, as you can imagine, you have 20,000 additional identities, but you also have 20,000 additional, not 20,000 additional, maybe 15,000 additional laptops or desktops, those endpoints. So now we're taking a step back and evaluating the architecture of that. And kind of what Shane was talking about, how can we leverage automation and figure out, okay, our risk appetites for these endpoints. With all of these endpoints out there, we need to evaluate, okay, does this endpoint have the right operating system? Does it have the right updates on it? Okay, can it connect to our network? And so we're trying to put in the policies in place that will allow a good baseline is what we're trying to implement and being successful at it, while also leveraging a CMDB, so that change configuration management database that will house all of those different changes. So it's all a centralized architecture that we're trying to implement. And I'd say it's going pretty well, but it leverages a lot of communication with the other program offices.
Mm-hmm.
At the SBA, there's a lot of, there's all kinds of different program offices that we have to communicate with and we have to work together with. And so it's been a journey, but I think it will end well.
Right. And journey, I think the operative word, right? This is a very dynamic environment you're operating in there. And just keeping pace with that and coordinating all these various activities, super important. It sounds like you guys are off to a great start there. Tony, how about at Lookout? You cited that you have a lot of, well, let me step back and say you all are in the middle of a lot of different agencies. You're seeing a lot of different activities. Why don't you give us an example of one program that you're working on the Zero Trust architecture that you'd like to bring to the attention of our user population?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're working with one of the DoD agencies that's looking at. It's started out as a bring your own approved device BYOAD program, which we're seeing a lot of that. A lot of different agencies looking to replace GFE, get rid of the expensive and complexity of having a fleet of devices and trying to get the users to bring their own. The technology is there, right? Whether it's the device manager as well as the mobile threat defense type solution from Lookout is there. What we're seeing though with a couple of these programs is they started out specifically as to secure BYO devices, but now they've, with Zero Trust on really a top of mind for everyone, they've expanded into looking at cloud security solutions as well, because those devices are now, particularly with so many people working from home and being outside the network and the data being outside the network, they're looking at cloud solutions for those devices as well as their other endpoints. So I think I'm pleased to see kind of this holistic approach where I certainly wouldn't call it previously as only point solutions, right? Because they're looking at a lot of things around mobile, but now the other things that they're looking at around mobile from a security perspective expand well beyond just the device itself and maybe what network it resides on. It's looking at the data at rest, data in transit, and then more of a continuous conditional access perspective. So really pleased to see that expansion and having that being top of mind in some of these traditional mobile programs.
Right. You know, it really is an ecosystem. It's quite right. It's an architecture. And there's a lot of different pieces and parts of it that have to snap together and be laid out. Alper, speaking of architecture, again, we talked about the zero trust strategy, the maturity model that's out there, et cetera. A lot of good work going on to nail down the definitions of some of these things so that there's not 10 different agencies going in 10 different directions. Give us an example of where you are on one of the programs that you'd like to focus your attention on.
I mean, our focus is right now on this big project that we launched, and our goal is to put out some implementations out there as examples that allows us to demonstrate some of these different approaches that we describe in our document. And it's very important to do that right. You know, giving examples and using the commercially available technologies, putting them out there will create a foundational starting point for a lot of the folks that are looking to move toward ZTAs. And so that's where our focus is. But what we're doing is basically we're taking the approach of, you know, crawl, walk and run type of approach where we're tackling a minimum viable implementation initially, because the assumption is that most folks out there will have some sort of endpoint security solutions on their, you know, endpoints. It's certainly people, you know, some will have identity stores or some kind of identity management system in place. Some network security solutions in place. So we want to leverage all of those to start and you know, using a essentially identity management system to drive the zero trust policy enforcement aspect of things. And so that's our starting point, and that's where we're focusing on. Of course, the goal is to expand that into more complex versions of zero trust architectures, going into, for example, microsegmentation and then software-defined perimeters. And of course, SASE, we'll be looking at that, you know, proxying, giving access in that way. And the thing is, we have about 18 months to do all of this stuff. And, you know, there's also the IoT aspect of things that we want to look at. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do it on this particular phase. It might be the second phase that we follow on. But our path is definitely etched in stone at this point. And we just want to put out something out there that will bring value. And so that's where we are.
And no doubt that's going to be extremely helpful, because you hear so many times, look, I've got all these different pieces and parts. I've got endpoint security. I have some sort of micro segmentation of sorts, or I don't have any. You know, where do I start, right? And I think having you all lay that down and give some examples is going to be really important and really critical to the community to move this forward. All right, we're going to take another short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about zero trust architecture, and we were just pointing out specific programs. Mark, I want to throw it over to you at Illumio. You all, have doing a lot of work in the private sector as well, right? And a lot of the capability and implementations cross over into what you're seeing in the federal service, I would imagine. Give us an example of a program you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, that's a good lead-in, Luke. we have a tremendous amount of experience in the commercial side, especially in the financial sector, where most of the large banks in the world are using Illumio to protect their financial transactions, right?
Because it's a heavily regulated sector, I might add.
Exactly. And so what we're finding is we're working right now with the Department of the Air Force, specifically on something called CNAP, which is Cloud Native Access Point. And that was released back in August of this year. And one of the things in there, of course, is microsegmentation, which they authorize as ingress. But specifically, we're working with them on developing an on-prem zero trust security stack that you could basically come into an Air Force base and install. The analogy I like to describe, it's like a tennis court where that's the legacy system, and then you come in with a tennis bubble, and you now have 24/7, 365 ability to play tennis, just like a security stack on a legacy Air Force data center would give you that 24/7, 365 zero trust ability as well. They're looking at it like infrastructure as code, really applying a lot of the principles of Cloud One to that environment. So we're working with the Department of the Air Force to basically focus on the microsegmentation piece. And since we're decoupled from the network architecture and we're focusing on application security, we can install very quickly, and we can actually protect those initially high value assets. But we're looking at 180 Air Force bases and Space Force bases. So you've got to have automation, like Trafinia said, which is extremely important. And even Chris talked about containerized applications. And so from a delivery perspective, you would have to have that as well. So we have a containerized version of our software that can be rolled out very quickly, automated to help the Department of the Air Force really get to at least a modicum of zero trust. And we're also working with them on the visibility piece as well, right? They call it network discovery. So you've got to discover, view the network, and then you can start to microsegment and roll this out.
We've had Frank from the prior CTO of the Air Force on here several times, a very complex environment. And I think that virtual moat around those high valued assets, super important. We're gonna roll over to top priorities. Alper, let me start with you. I know there's a lot of different things you're working on. Top priority for you right now with zero trust architecture?
Well, my top priority is to see the project that we launched to its 100% success. I might sound like a broken record here, but a lot of eyes are on us. So 100% of my attention is really focused on this project at this time. And it's important that we put out some example ZTAs out there. But what we do with our projects is we also complement each solution that we build with an 1800 series document, which we work on in parallel as we develop our solutions. And this 1800 series document is what we refer to as practice guide. We basically describe how we put together the solution, and we outline the steps that somebody else can take over and recreate the solution. We list the technologies that we used, test cases that we performed, demonstrated, and we also map the solution's capabilities, security capabilities to NIST cybersecurity framework. And so we have really two parallel activities that are top priority that is on my plate, going in parallel. And we want to put out anything that we developed, and we can also put out as or document at the same time. And that is our focus right now.
And we don't consider that broken record. We consider that being laser focused. Shane,
yes,
top priority.
Laser focused. Thank you.
Absolutely laser focused. Shane, top priority for this year. Number one priority.
I know this is going to say, I know we've talked about a lot of really great architectural things, technology things, but honestly, I think one of the biggest things we're focused on right now is the cultural change.
That's okay. That's a big one.
And it's the hardest, actually, in my view. Mark Schwartz, I think, demonstrated this better than any former CIO of USCIS. He spent 3 years driving cultural change so that we could do agile development.
Mm-hmm.
Zero trust, while it adds a lot of capabilities, a lot of great useful things from the security side, even on the networking side, it does add friction as well, to your user population, to your development teams, to your networking teams. So driving cultural change and getting back to some of the points we've made about, hey, taking away those privileges or taking away things that people have always done or the way they've always done things, is just, you can't speak enough volumes about that. And you start now. You don't wait until you're trying to implement those technologies and they all are, having a meltdown. You need them on board. You need them, you need to be part of that team. So we've, focusing on that cultural change is going to be a big piece of what we do this year while we implement a number of newer technologies, API security, and finishing out our security, our cert automation. Those are going to be other things going on in the background so that when we get ready to, the culture is ready for those changes.
Cultural change means there's a lot of cheese moving, right? So big area to focus your attention on. I really do appreciate that. Traphinia, number one priority for you in regards to zero trust this year.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's going to touch on what Shane was talking about earlier about those Microsoft Word documents and making sure that we have all the inputs from all of the different program offices, the network engineers, the IAM people. We need to have everyone on board, making sure we all know what zero trust means to the SBA. So we're continuing to work on those documents as well as EDR. We are already utilizing EDR at the SBA, but we want to make sure that all of those agents or that infrastructure is everywhere that it needs to be. So we'll be continuing to work on that as well.
Great place to focus the attention. All right, we're going to wrap it up with this last question. Tony, I'm going to start with you at Lookout. What I'm going to ask you is, what does it look like in 2 to 3 years? What does the environment look like when you're entering into said agency? What are you expecting to see? What's sort of coming out of the petri dish, out of the lab into the operator's hands 2 to 3 years from now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'll give Shane a little credit on this one. I read an article recently where he was quoted as saying that the ultimate goal of zero trust is to put your entire enterprise out on the public internet. And it's a daunting proposition for private sector and public sector alike to think about what that truly means. And I think, we've touched on it many times today. Zero trust it's a cultural shift. There will probably never be a proclamation of mission accomplished, right? We're always striving to close the gaps, but the threat actors, as we know, will always continue to adjust their attack surface and the threat vector, and we always have to keep up with that. So 2 to 3 years out, I suspect virtually all of the networks will be out on the public internet. It might be still some legacy systems in some corners of public and private sector, but the good news is even today there's technology to support those initiatives. And I only expect those to continue to improve. Ransomware is not going away. State-sponsored attacks are not going away. We will continue to see different things, right? We've seen pipelines shut down. We've seen meat distribution impacted. I suspect that we'll potentially see some things on a grander scale that potentially are more life and society impacting than those two, and we have to be ready for it. So again, the technology's there, and the technology and the vision of zero trust are fortunately both marching in the same direction.
No doubt the attacks aren't going to go away, and no doubt they're going to get much more sophisticated. Thank you very much, Tony. Chris, how about over at Quest? What's it going to look like in 2 to 3 years from where you all sit?
From where we sit, and when I think about how far we've come, and I think that's the credit we don't really give ourselves, both as industry, as government, in commercial space. We've made a lot of leaps and bounds, quite frankly. I remember when security was not even a thought. I remember people thinking that, well, it's not connected to the network, it's secure, I don't have to worry about it, it's in a locked room. They give us the Mission Impossible example of Tom Cruise descending on a pulley system to go break into a computer and say, oh, that's a secure system. It says, no, it's not. What we see really is a modernization of what I think of the identity pipeline. And when I say the identity pipeline, I think of, you know, the basic questions of what we ask people in an access query. That is who you are, what you have, where you are, what you know. And I like to add how you're connecting as well. And what we're going to find is that that identity pipeline is going to need varying points of management, more sophisticated automation, quite frankly, because all those factors really need machine speed to process, for instance. And I think we need to move away from the concept of that. If I'm just collecting data, collecting logs, I'm looking at screens, God forbid, for instance, or I'm looking at the normal anomaly detection or threat detection we're doing right now, we're gonna have continuing issues. For instance, we talked about pipeline closures, supply chain attacks, things like that. We didn't even talk about Kaseya, quite frankly, which is a huge identity pipeline issue that we actually had. So when we think about the future, it's going to be, and I come back to what Shane said, for instance, that is, it's going to be automation, it's going to be systems, and I don't necessarily mean artificial intelligence and machine learning. Sure, those will play a role, but I think it's going to be much better systems that can actually aggregate, for instance, detect things in those things, highlight them to the right people, for instance, and route those requests. The old workflows that we used to have, for instance, I used to laugh at things like the good old Lotus Notes days where we'd have workflows and we said, oh yeah, I now have a Word document to go edit. We've got to do the same thing in security, for instance. So when we're working on identity as a system or identity pipelines, we've got to figure out exactly how do we route everything to the right person at the right time, for instance, to get people the right level of access, because that's where the rubber meets the road, for instance. It's not just deploying a great new system or buying a nice slick solution. It's how do we actually implement these things? So I think the future is going to hold a lot more automation. It's going to disseminate a lot more decision trees among people that normally aren't part of the security pipeline or identity pipeline today. And it's going to put a lot of onus on end users. They're going to have to get used to doing more sophisticated things with their devices and paying attention to the types of security they're accessing and technologies they're using on a personal level, because there is no more perimeter, quite frankly, and we all know that now. I've become keenly aware, quite frankly, and now the future means that the identity pipeline means that everyone's going to be involved, which means more automation, for instance, and our systems are going to have to get a lot smarter for us to be successful in the future.
And continue to stay smart. Mark, how about over at Illumio? What's the demand signal looking like? What are you anticipating in 2 to 3 years?
Right. So let me just preface that by saying that what I'm seeing, certainly the automation piece is extremely important, but I think we as a country, we as folks in federal and the vendor community that supports the federal space need to have a much higher degree of urgency. I believe that there needs to be a way to prioritize the fact that we are going to get attacked. We have to worry about China, because that's our #1 adversary. And we have to make sure that we can protect against these nation state type attacks. But I think from our perspective, what we see is that you've got to have that visibility. We just released something just a couple of weeks ago called Illumio Cloud Secure, which allows cloud native application visibility so that you can actually see what's happening in the cloud from a workload application perspective. That's absolutely critical when you're talking about putting your unclassified network in the public cloud, for example. And give you an example of why visibility is so important. So one of our customers at the US Space Force had put Illumio in to their network. And within 10 minutes, they were able to see unauthorized connections on the back end that they didn't even know about. This was extremely eye-opening. They were able to shut that down immediately, and that made them a big believer of the importance of visibility and then micro-segmenting. So I really believe that the visibility piece is extremely important, and then we're going to start to roll out micro-segmentation. The last comment I'll make is I would agree with Shane about the term zero trust going away. So maybe by 3 years from now, we won't have the term zero trust. We'll be talking probably about the components, whether it's identity, whether it's micro-segmentation under the app and workload pillar, et cetera. So perhaps we'll all have a T-shirt where it just says zero trust with a line through it, and then maybe have some kind of clever comment on the back that talks about what we're really doing now.
Sure, I survived zero trust. Trefenia, what's it going to look like in a couple of years? If I'm a small business owner trying to apply for a loan, am I going to be able to sit on the couch with my mobile device and feel good securely about that and be successful?
Yes, the answer is yes. We're working to make that more possible in the future.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think it'll be really good. But we're going to be leveraging SOAR, that security orchestration and automated response, for all of our infrastructure. We're making sure that we will continue to leverage that and leverage all of the time saved, so that our security engineers can focus on those high level threats. And then also, I really think in the next 1 to 3 years, we'll continue to see more of a collaboration between the government agencies and industry. I've seen a lot of that in the past just 9 months, 9 to 12 months. There's been a lot of collaboration to find a zero trust solution that encompasses all of the pillars. And because not just one vendor has the solution and not just one agency has the solution, but I really see a collaboration and competitors working together to make that solution. So I'm excited for the future, and I think we'll come out with something more secure for everyone.
Right. I think that's where there's maturity models, et cetera, really come into play.
Yeah.
Jane, what can we expect in a couple of years? I know you all aggressively into the cloud. You still have a bunch of legacy stuff out there you're working on. A lot of benefit seekers demanding your goods and services. What do you see in 2 to 3 years?
Hopefully, I'm still employed. That's always going to be a plus.
That's a going assumption.
Going assumption. I see a move towards three things. One, heavy focus on data-driven security. That behavioral-based approach to how you do security, as opposed to sort of just at-large monitoring. Non-normal. You're not looking for the way outside the box, nor abnormal. You're really looking for the little tiny changes in that big bell curve, which is really focuses you back onto that threat hunting approach to security. I think we'll also see a move towards, following suit with what the development community is doing, a domain-driven design. I think we're going to see a domain-driven security as well. USCIS is already working towards that. That's going to replace the concept of zero trust. That's going to be what we do. That's how we'll start thinking about it, because it's just sort of what happens. And I think finally, you'll see, as part of what you can do with some of the zero trust principles and practices, a heavier push towards microservices and even serverless environments and deployments. It helps a little bit with multi-cloud if that's something you're really terribly interested in doing and really creating yourself all kinds of headaches for yourself. But obviously there's going to be the shortcomings with FSMA that need to be addressed before we get there. FSMA wouldn't even consider a microservices system technically a system. And then it creates a number of problems where data lives, how data lives, and where it exists. But I think that drive towards that is because it solves certain security problems, it creates others, but it does solve a number of development problems as well as security issues. So I think that's going to be very critical as well.
Yeah, no doubt that some of these policies will undoubtedly catch up. Alper, take us home here. You have a fantastic publication that you laid out there, got in front of that whole community. Now you're putting these references together. What are you expecting to see? What's NIST expecting to see in regards to zero trust architecture across the community over the next 2 to 3 years?
Hopefully, we anticipate that, our example ZTAs that we will be implementing will bring value and will be adopted, will be in use, or at least will be used as a starting point for most outfits that want to move towards ZTA. So that's as an outcome of our work. But in terms of where everyone is going to be, I think most will be in a more mature state in their zero trust orchestration, have better, more granular policies in place, because they will be more clued into their networks, what's happening in their networks, what's connected, who's on the network. There will be more focus on behavior-based security, I would say, which is really the key. And of course, my panelists already mentioned about the automation aspect of things. That definitely is important. Needs to be even better. Early detection and responses is whichever way you do it and automate it is very critical. Yeah, so I think through 1 to 3 years, I think there will be some innovations in that regard, but we'll also be in a more mature state, I would say. I'm not saying that everyone is going to be 100% zero trust, because there's not going to be any such thing. As we move forward, we'll probably discover more clever hacks that infiltrate into our networks also, but at the same time, we'll figure out better ways to protect the network. But right now, zero trust is the way to go about it, because it allows us to secure our high value assets in a more granular fashion, and it allows us to also get better at it because it's policy based, and because we're also analyzing our logs, and so it's a system that kind of gets better as you utilize it.
No doubt. I mean, it's an architecture, it's a journey, and we're all on board. I want to thank each one of you, not only for taking your time out of your busy schedules to talk about this subject, but for everything that you do to keep this country safe. One of you cited that, there's a lot of bad actors out there trying to do some really bad things. So we appreciate the community coming together to keep everyone in this country safe. I'd like to also thank the sponsors for supporting us on the show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Network that make our program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, we'd like to thank you, the listening audience out there that tune in every month. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network.